Welcome to Bad Cousins. I'm Ben Schumann-Stoller. Last time, in episode 2, we started to go a little bit deeper into the main question of this show, which is, why are the Abraham Accords named after Abraham? And we started to learn how rich of a symbol this Abraham figure really is, because for Europeans and Americans, he represents a kind of mythical origin of monotheism and a figurehead of universal humanity and all these kinds of idealist values. While for people in the Middle East, he also has another meaning. He's like a father figure. He's the grandfather of Jews and Arabs, because in the Bible, he's the father of Isaac, who goes on to be father of Jews, and Ishmael, who goes on to be father of Arabs. Now, we keep asking ourselves, how the Abraham Accords and this framework of Abrahamic peace between cousins, the Arabs and the Jews, can be reconciled with the reality right now of war and conflict, of exclusion and autocracy. Why, on the one hand, Trump's proposed Gaza peace plan proclaims mutual understanding, while on the other, Israeli politicians carry out policies of ethnic cleansing. Well, the original myth of Abraham and the idea of cousinage, the relationship between cousins, specifically how those relationships play out politically, is a good place to start, I think. In this episode, we're going to learn why these concepts, this myth of Abraham and this idea of cousinage, despite being ideas that the current leaders of Israel, the UAE, the US, etc., love to promulgate as positive, also turn out to be concepts that are quite reactionary and violent. To make that point, we're going to go back to the very origins of the story, back to where the myth is first set down in the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. Now, we're not assuming that any of you out there have the biblical literacy of like Tucker Carlson or anything, so we're going to go through the relevant parts of the story for you. There's also a really helpful diagram of the whole Abraham family that Matan drew up. We're going to put that on our website, badcousins.show, and also up at the Colo Media Instagram, so check that out. Then, after we do the whole Abraham story and the genealogy, we're going to talk to anthropologist Naor Ben-Yehoyada from Columbia University, who's done extensive research about family metaphors and what makes family metaphors so powerful in politics. But first, the story of Abraham and his two sons. We're going to have to skip a lot of stuff, some of our favorite stories. But before we step in there, it might be useful to say a little bit about when this was written, by whom. This Abraham, insofar as he actually existed, was born around 1813 BC and died around 1638 BC. So
let's just clarify the perspective here, because we're like, no offense to any dispensationalists in the audience, but we're not going to be taking the Bible literally here. We're going to be taking the sort of academic scholarship perspective, critical scholarship perspective here, just for a second, like you said, to sort of emplace the story within a historical framework. So if Abraham had been a real person, which the scholarly consensus is that he was not, unlike Jesus and Buddha, he would have lived according to the story, according to the chronologies of the Old Testament, around what you said, 1813 BC.
Yeah, but he also lived for 200 years.
Yeah, according to the sort of modern academic scholarship, the story was actually written quite a bit later than that, like around the 4th century BC. The context, again, according to modern scholarship, is the end of what was called the first exile. So there were Jewish elites who had been living in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, for quite a while, migrating or returning to Palestine, to the land of Israel as they saw it, right? And it's not coincidental that Abraham is also from Mesopotamia, an Iraqi, as we would call him today, who moves to that region. So they're basically telling a story about a character who's making the same sort of move that they are, geographically speaking.
And this migration is Abraham's migration is divinely mandated. Right. God appears to him in the Bible and says, Lech lecha, go forth, from the land of your fathers to the land I will show you.
Yeah.
And that sort of kicks it off. He doesn't go alone, does he?
No, he has his whole mishpucha with him, right?
Right. So what do we got? We got his wife, Sarah,
who might or might not also be his half-sister, weirdly.
Right. We have a maidservant, Hagar.
Who is Sarah's maidservant, not Abraham's, also important.
Yes. But he doesn't have any kids.
He doesn't have any kids.
Right. Even though his name means exalted father.
Yeah. Kind of a cruel joke at this point.
And God keeps making these extravagant promises about all these descendants they're going to have, but they're not having any kids.
No. And then?
Well, it's Sarah who suggests that Abraham have sex with her servant, Hagar. She says, maybe I will be built up through her.
Yep.
I guess if you're being really understanding, you could read this as like a love positive polyamorous surrogacy situation.
Yeah, if you want it to be very understanding and very anachronistic. When a woman has a slave woman, a female slave, then her children might end up belonging to the mother, to the mistress. This happens again in the third generation. Jacob's wives, Rachel and Leah, both have maidservants who have children who are considered Rachel and Leah's children.
Right. But then what happens is that Hagar gets pregnant. And there's immediately a conflict.
Yeah.
So that doesn't work really.
Yeah.
So much for like love positive. Sarah blames Abraham. He shrugs it off. He says, it's your servant. It's your problem. And Sarah starts abusing Hagar.
Right. So there's a tension there because Hagar's son is supposed to maybe in some way belong to Sarah. But Sarah perceives her maidservant as having had a child before her, of course, when she still doesn't have one, and a male child, as something which causes her to put on airs in a way, right? If we're interpreting the story, something which causes her to think that she is better in some way than her mistress. And this threatens her. It threatens her position in the family because having a son, even if you're not a free woman, even if you're a slave, having a son puts you in this position which is potentially much stronger than a woman who doesn't have sons or children at all.
Sarah starts abusing Hagar, and Hagar runs away.
Yeah, into the desert.
And then what?
Then a miracle happens. An angel appears to Hagar in the desert, not for the last time, and tells her to go back to her mistress and submit. But there's also a bonus, right? There's also some something to sweeten the deal, which is this very mysterious prophecy about the child.
Right. The angel says, I will greatly increase your offspring, and they shall be too many to count. Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael, for God has paid heed to your suffering.
Yeah. Ishmael means God hears.
Okay, so the angel keeps going. The angel says, is making more of these like mysterious predictions about Ishmael. Says, he shall be a wild ass of a man. That's unexpected. His hand in everything, and everything's hand in him. He shall dwell alongside all his brothers.
Yeah. So it's mysterious. It is very mysterious, and there's all sorts of ways of reading it. But from the get-go, we have this association between Ishmael and wildness. So like the wild ass is a sort of stereotypically or typically desert animal.
Yeah.
Also powerful, right? He's also there's this imputation of power to him, and also holiness, right? This is not every woman gets an angel coming to tell her what to name her son and what he's going to be like. This happens to a select number of women who have very important children within Judaism as well. He's also obviously troublesome in some unclear way. There's this yado bakol ve'yada kol bo, his hand in everything and everything's a hand in him, or everyone's hand. It could be either or in Hebrew. But so there's all this tension here, right? There's wildness in him. There's association with the desert. There's power and blessedness, but also this idea of troublesomeness and violence and kinship. Of course, the brothers appear there.
Yeah. So who are these brothers? Alongside his brothers, he shall dwell alongside all his brothers. That's also not really clear.
Yeah, I mean, if we go ahead in the story, Ishmael ends up having one brother, who is Isaac, of course, and then Abraham also has additional children by Keturah, who may or may not be Hagar.
Okay. In any case, there are other relatives, so we'll park that for a second. Hagar dutifully goes back to Sarah. Ishmael is born, and then the next miracle happens, which is that Sarah gets pregnant.
Yep.
God appears to Abraham and says, get ready, get your shit together. You're gonna have a kid, another one. And Abraham laughs.
Yep, Yitzchak, which is of course Isaac. That ends up being the boy's name. And laughter is going to be like a sort of recurring theme in this part of the story, a very troubling one. Basically, when Abe hears the news, he laughs in God's face. He had privileges like that. He could argue with God, laugh at him.
Yeah, they were cool like that.
And he says something like, all right, that's a good one, God. Just take care of my existing son,
Also, Sarah's like 90 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
So like it's also just laughable. Like it's funny, but it's also funny, like laughable.
She also laughs when she hears about it.
Right. In any case, I guess Ishmael's like a teenager now.
Mm-hmm. Isaac is born, grows up.
Yeah.
When he stops taking his mother's milk, there's a weaning party, and so they're having the celebration in favor of Isaac, the younger son, and then Ishmael does something that really pisses Sarah off. It's not clear exactly what it is. The word is vayitzachek, which is like a variation on Yitzchak. That is, he laughs. He does something which he considers funny, and which makes Sarah go apeshit. it makes her angry to the extent that later commentators, Jewish ones, feel like they have to justify why she's so angry by saying that when the text says that Ishmael was laughing, then he was actually doing something horrible, like worshiping idols or playing with his butthole.
Sarah goes up to Abraham and says, "Cast out that slave woman and her son, for the son of that slave shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac."
Yeah, very brutal words.
Yeah, and it's we're going to learn that they, this cast out that slave woman. That is going to echo, right?
Yeah, it's going to be taken up by some of the worst people around.
Yeah, and Abraham, what does Abraham do actually?
Well, he doesn't like it because he loves Ishmael. This is something that's,
he doesn't want to send them away.
There's not a lot of love in the Bible. There's sparing moments when it's told that one person loved another person, and we are told that Abraham loved Ishmael. So he's not happy about this at all.
He doesn't want to cast them out.
He doesn't want to cast them out. He goes to talk to God.
Right. Yeah.
And then God conveniently tells him to just do whatever Sarah wants again, not to worry about Ishmael, because I will, quote unquote, make a nation of him too.
Right. I like the idea that God's like, how can I find a good compromise for Abraham?
Yeah. And the compromise is always they're going to be big nations. This is how you calm down a parent, both for Hagar as well, right? The parents are concerned, they're worried about what's going to happen with their kids, and basically God just says, there's plenty of world for all of them to take over and be masters of. That seems to be his solution for instituting calm and peace and calm within the family.
Right. So Hagar goes to Beersheba.
Yeah, she gets booted out this time.
Right. And that's in southern Israel today.
Mm-hmm. In the desert.
And it's in the desert. And this time with a kid.
Right.
So here's where it gets disturbing a little bit. Abraham gives her some bread and water, but they run out and they're in the desert.
Yeah.
And the child's going to die.
Mm-hmm.
I find it very touching. The description of Hagar and her son, Ishmael, in the desert, running out of food and water. Yeah. And Hagar realizes her child's going to die.
Yeah.
And she doesn't want to see it. And this is the detail that I find really touching. Mm-hmm. She puts him under a bush and she walks away and she starts weeping. And the mom never wants to witness her own son starve to death. Right. So she turns away and it's heartbreaking. And a voice calls from heaven. So what happens?
A voice calls out from heaven to comfort her, and a well with flowing water appears. And here the text says that God was with the boy. He grows up in the desert. He becomes an archer.
They're saved, first of all.
He's saved.
Because of this well with
because of this magical
water.
well with flowing water that appears in the desert.
Yeah.
It's going to play a very important part in the Islamic versions of the story.
Yeah.
Anyway, sticking with Genesis, it says that God was with the boy. It says that he grows up in the desert. We're sort of fast forwarding here. Becomes an archer. His mother, who is Egyptian, I don't think we mentioned that important detail about Hagar. She's Egyptian. She goes to Egypt and she finds him an Egyptian wife, and he has some sons, which I'm sure makes his mama very happy. After that, we sort of lose track of him, but the strand of the story is going to get picked up later in the Quran, but also in some surprising Jewish traditions. Importantly, Ishmael does come back and make a guest appearance when Abraham dies.
Right. There's another sort of sweet moment that we don't get enough detail in, but apparently Isaac and Ishmael bury Abraham together.
In the cave of Machpelah in Hebron.
Which is still there, right?
Yeah, that's where the Ibrahimi Mosque is, where it's called the Tomb of Abraham by the Jews. Shared in very, very tense way by Jews and Muslims. In 1994, Baruch Goldstein, the fascist from Brooklyn, opened fire there and killed several dozen Palestinian Muslim people at prayer.
Yeah, the story again. These places have contemporary relevance, obviously. How do we talk about Isaac? I mean.
So Isaac is kind of like the biggest cipher of the three patriarchs, right? Abraham's the big one, of course, that we're discussing here at length. Jacob also has like a very, very important part to play in the story. Isaac mainly functions as a sort of link between them. Even in the story of the sacrifice, of the binding of Isaac, he's very passive. Like he doesn't actually do very much. His passivity is actually sort of the main characteristic that he displays in the story. So Isaac is like obviously important genealogically speaking. I don't think there's much more that we need to say about him as a character.
So next up is a conversation between you, Matan, and Naor Ben-Yehoyada, who's an anthropologist that's worked on family metaphors and politics. And we've already made the case that Jews and Arabs think of each other as cousins. And now we just went through the Abrahamic genealogy So why is this cousinage important, and why do we care?
I mean, there's something kind of interesting, uncanny even about this relationship with cousins that I've been obsessing about, as you know. Cousins are related to you, but they're not like closely related, right? They're not brothers or sisters, parents, but they're also not strangers. They're in this sort of in between position, and people have all sorts of intense relationships with their cousins. Sometimes people fall in love with their cousins, even though it's not allowed. And I think that's what kind of makes it a very fruitful base for imagining all sorts of politics, which can be ambivalent, which have all sorts of sides to them, good and bad. And Naor has written extensively about about cousinage as a political concept, and we've talked a lot about it. He's been a big influence on my work, so I wanted to have him on and ask him some questions about like anthropology and cousins.
What I got out of the interview was the idea that kinship and becoming kin brings people closer, obviously, like becoming family, but also makes people politically tighter. And when that happens, you increase competition and violence. People start fighting over that kind of tightness, those blessings, those protections, those benefits of being part of the kin. And I think you and Naor make that very clear.
Yeah, and not to get too much ahead of ourselves here, I think when people are in the same family, that means that they care about the same things, and they tend to also fight over those things.
Plus, as what I also learned is that if you're not part of those kinship bonds, so like in this Abraham model, you're not Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, you're not part of the family, then what are you? You're completely excluded. And similarly, but differently, of course, with women, you aren't exactly excluded, you're part of the family, but you're considered inferior. We saw that with Hagar and how Sarah got to have all the power in the family. So I agree. I think these familial metaphors are very useful and start to hint at ways, as we'll develop in the next episodes, actually, that we can maybe use this model more progressively. But let's get into the conversation with you, Matan, and Naor Ben-Yehoyada.
My name is Naor Ben-Yehoyada. I teach anthropology at Columbia University. I work in the Eastern and Central Mediterranean, mostly Sicily and Israel-Palestine.
So, no, the reason we wanted to talk to you is because you have studied the political use of metaphors that come from the world of kinship and family. The one that we want to talk about most is cousinage, cousins. But first, I think maybe we start with the one that's both simpler and maybe more common, which is siblinghood, brotherhood, fraternity in politics.
Sure, yes. If you think about all the kinship terms that people use, you have brother, sister, uncle, daughter, son, father, mother, grandparent, etc. The only one of all of these that has a modern political career is brotherhood. The only term that people use when they mean the good politics, the real politics, when they want to ask or demand from their counterpart a loyalty, commitment, equality, parity, they want to mark that they're same somehow, is brother. Later on, sister also picks up. Now, within the Old Testament, brotherhood is still working within broader kinship concept. Somebody to whom you are related somehow, or to whom you imagine you're related somehow by forms of kinship, you're just short-circuiting it as my brother. In Christianity, you can become somebody's brother if you become their brother or sister in Christ. In the early 18th century, Freemasons secularized it. And that brotherhood, very much so say the Freemasons themselves, created the mold for the brotherhood and fraternity at the heart of the French Revolution, nation states, and the International Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where it says that all men are born equal and should act towards each other in the spirit of brotherhood.
That's great. We want to get on to the next kinship concept that becomes political, which is, of course, the center of the series, and that is cousinage, the relationship between people whose parents are siblings, right? As a sort of archetype for political belonging. So maybe you could tell us about how anthropologists have dealt with this concept of cousins and cousinage over time.
Absolutely. So cousinage has a life before and after brotherhood emerges. So cousinage in the Mediterranean world is an adulterated kind of brotherhood. You're related, but you're related not because you're somebody's brother, because your father is the brother of their father, mostly, because we were talking about usually relations that follow the male line. In that case, yes, your blood is their blood, but just a quarter of your blood is the quarter of their blood, not completely. Which means what, or which spells out politically as what? Because you share a world, you share resources, you share risks, but you cannot moralize somebody immediately to say, "You're my brother. Either you come fight with me or not." There is more cajoling involved. There is more convincing involved because that guy has his own brothers and you have your own.
Yeah, there's more room for maneuver.
There is more room for maneuver, which brings up the classic kind of Mediterranean dictum of political action with my brother against my cousin, with my first cousin against my second cousin, with my second cousin against my third cousin.
Yeah.
In that kind of continuum of loyalty and mobilization, there's nothing more strict than your brother. But between your second and your fifth cousin, a lot of things can happen.
Right. So I think something to pick up on something that you already sort of mentioned, but I think is very important for our case. This cousinage works in a particular way in families or in societies or in models of societies that are thought of as counting kinship through the male line, right? So what we call patrilineal societies. Maybe you can explain what patrilineal means in this context.
So again, in this kind of society that we're imagining, we need to imagine it against two kind of alternatives. One is the ideal model of the nuclear family. You have your mommy, your daddy, your brother, your sister, and your dog. And other than them, you don't owe anything to anybody. The other model is that everybody's related to everybody else always and in many ways. So as a person, as a political actor, you're not streamlined. Mm-hmm. In the Mediterranean, so-called Mediterranean model, you are. Because you are, first and foremost, a son of your father, which means that because also your father is, first and foremost, the son of his father, then you are related and need to fight with and need to conserve the interest of that line, which connects you to your father, to his father, and to his father, and therefore to all other male children of that kind of. And that creates a group. And that group, for example, has financial interest, economic interest. It has an inheritance. It has an estate. Yeah. That estate,
territorial interests, maybe.
It has territorial interests. You are your life chances, your ability to marry, your ability to live, your ability to thrive is going to depend on the conservation of that interest.
You keep the property within the family.
Exactly.
I think last episode we mentioned that Jews and Arabs call each other cousins in the Middle East. In Hebrew, as in English, there's only one term for cousins, but in Arabic there's two terms. There's Ibn al-Am, which means children of the uncle on the father's side, and Ibn al-Khal, which are cousins on the mother's side. And the terms that Arabs use for Jews is Ibn al-Am.
Yes. Now, Ibn al-Am evokes exactly that entire set of loyalty, similarity, sameness, responsibility, trust. Again, ideals of all those things.
Mm-hmm. The thing that really was the most kind of the biggest mindfuck for me when I read the text of the peace treaty between the UAE and Israel is that they speak about the Jews and the Arabs as these descendants of a common ancestor. They don't use the term Ibn al-Am, but they almost might have. What do you think it means for relationship between Jews and Arabs, for this political relationship in the Middle East to be framed as not only a family relationship in the vaguest sense, but also specifically as a relation between patrilineal cousins?
So I think currently it means
terrible things.
It means to structure, to mold the horizon of political international action as that between cousins, as that between units that are descendant from a shared source. And now that sounds lovely, doesn't it? But at the same time, it enacts all the exclusions and all the violence that the patrilineal model does. Because if you think about families, if families and the various relationships within those families depend completely on the relationship between male sons and their father and their father's father, it means that the ability to decide, the discretion, the control over resources, the control over people's gender and sexuality are completely at the hands of only one party. Now, when the Abraham Accord chooses to connect the state of Israel as if it were Isaac or Jacob with some countries in the Arab world, as if they were Ishmael and his children, the people who are left out are immediately left out exactly according to that script, with all the metaphorical, mythical force that it has.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we're sort of grappling with here is the question of to what extent we need to take this sort of ideological talk seriously as actually reflecting social realities, right? I mean, immediately the critique of the Palestinian feminist anthropologist Leila Boulod comes up from the 1980s when she's basically saying, listen, all you white male anthropologists basically talking about the Middle East as if it's this sort of medieval tribal society. What you're doing is basically in service of imperialist ideologies that are subjugating people in the Middle East. And I think we're always grappling with this question of are we sort of feeding into representations of the Middle East as this sort of savage tribal place? Another way of asking this is, what is the real life impact of these sorts of ideologies? So, Trump, Bibi, and Mohammed bin Zayed are all happy talking about this as a relationship of cousinage. Why should we care? What kind of difference does any of this make in the world?
If you take the ever-expanding map of relatedness, you need to kind of carve out from that something that is more strict, more exclusive, and it is going to be your group. Because if everybody's related, you're not talking about whose group is. It's like you can reach everybody.
Yeah.
Now, the recipe for groupness passes in the first, in the episode of Genesis from Abraham in the next 3 generations, according to the blessing. And by the way, you said before that a story of Abraham is a myth. It's also a story that comes with a myth that comes with a ritual, like any good myth, every good myth. And that ritual is gendered and sexualized. It's circumcision.
Yeah, which the Muslims also practice, the cousins.
Sorry?
Which our cousins also practice.
Which cousins also practice. Now, the blessing is something that, according to the way the story develops, the narrative develops in the myth. All that is to say that the script of inheritance and the script of the following the male line doesn't create just, effusive love among all males of the same family. It also creates competition.
Okay, but there's this sort of, there's kind of a cutting operation that happens here, right? It's in addition to the circumcision, a more sort of metaphorical cutting operation, in which I think the sort of patrilineal story enables us to say, first of all, who is and isn't related to us, and within those who are related to us, what it is that might enable us to have an amicable relationship, right? So
yes.
I think both of these aspects are really important, because there are people who just aren't in the story, right? The Palestinians aren't in the story. They're not Arabs. They're not actual cousins. And then, but even among those who are in the story, there is this question of division, again, a sort of cutting of. So there's an inheritance. There's a common inheritance, and in order to be able to live together, we have to decide which of us gets which part of it. And it might even be possible for each side to consider themselves blessed, so long as they don't want the same thing, so long as they don't, if they're not fighting over the same inheritance. So in that sense, the sort of the Jews get Jerusalem and the Muslims get Mecca, and it would be a very nice sort of way of dividing up the inheritance if it was tenable, which of course it isn't.
And there's another element here that the story of the blessings, the story of the developing of the sons of Israel as those who are blessed, related to people who are not blessed, is a very particular kind of supremacy. Think about it. When people speak about white supremacy, they imagine that Party A, those who call themselves white, consider themselves deeply unrelated because racially different from Party B, the non-whites, whoever they count to as non-whites. There is a different, much more complex, maybe pernicious script, whereas Party A, sons of Israel, consider themselves very much related to Party B because they're their cousins, only supreme to them because they're blessed, chosen, and the other are not.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then, so I think that brings up the next question, which is, what about those people who aren't related? Like, because as we've discussed, The Gulf states, including of course the Emirates, are hugely dependent on migrant labor. Like 90% of the population, I think, in the UAE is non-citizen migrants who are very heavily exploited and have no civil rights.
Yeah.
In Israel, it's not quite as large, among other reasons, because until recently there were a lot of Palestinians working in the Israeli economy. But of course, Israel is also quite dependent on migrant labor and is now becoming more dependent on migrant labor, including, for example, the people that I research, the migrant workers in agriculture, who come from Thailand and are Buddhist. They're neither Muslim nor Christian nor Jewish. These are large populations in the Middle East, especially in these so-called Abrahamic countries, and they're growing.
In that sense, the Abraham Accords declare a very strict inner group of countries that deserve, or people in countries and groups in countries that deserve to belong to that kind of family tree with Abraham and its top, and therefore deeply hierarchical exploitative relations with everybody else.
All right, Matan, let's you and Naor really went into anthropology family land there. So I think we should do a bit of recap.
Anthropology geekland.
Yeah. So let's go over it again and make sure that we really capture the main parts here. So what was the main point for you of getting Naor on the show?
Yeah, I think where we came down at the end of the discussion was that the Abrahamic family framework provides a particular way of viewing politics that has like far broader repercussions than what you would think at first, right? We started out thinking about cousinage as this pretty innocuous thing, even kind of like a naively positive view of the relationship. That was we were uncomfortable with that from the beginning, right?
Yeah.
But as a model, and again, I think it's really important to stress that we're talking about a model of politics, a model that people have in their heads, not about the way things actually work, which has to do with a lot of other stuff. So as a model, it has all these repercussions because these aren't just any old cousins. They're patrilineal cousins within a patrilineal system.
Yeah, easy with the jargon again.
Yeah, sorry. But it's important, right? Jews and Arabs aren't like cousins who come from different families, like cousins that intermarry with one another. Because they're the children of two brothers who belong to the same family, then they have this common inheritance that, as we said at the top of the show, they either need to fight over, or share out, right? It belongs to both of them, which is a problem. And this has a lot of political implications that we kind of, I think, teased out there towards the end.
Yeah, I think this is what I finally really took away. Like, you have to either fight over it or you have to share it. And when you put it like that, without oversimplifying, it becomes a very urgent, also contemporary political point that you're making, I think. But then there's also this gender aspect that you and Naor started talking about at the very end of the interview.
Yeah, and we'll get into this more in the next episodes, but this sort of patriarchal family is really sort of totalitarian towards women. The best and maybe the only way for a woman to gain any power at all within this sort of system is by having sons who will gain power for themselves. And that's what sets up the Sarah-Hagar rivalry, of course. Women had better obey whatever the men in the family say and marry who they're told to marry. Stay within the sort of confines of the family and not get too quote unquote loose. Otherwise, a lot of violence might ensue.
So we've talked about sort of how sharing or being part of the same kinship model can lead to this competition, and we've talked about the sort of inferiority of women. What about territory? So, like, what about the things that people are competing over?
So territory is obviously really important. Ishmael goes away into the desert at the end of the story, or at the end of this episode of the story. Next episode, we'll be talking about Islamic versions, which kind of continue the story, where Ishmael builds up his desert kingdom around Mecca. So there are some grounds, as we can see already, there are some grounds here for a sort of agreement between Isaac's children, quote unquote, and Ishmael's children. They can both live in peace if each one stays in their place. And, this is really resonant with the sort of fascist reading of the story in Israel today. Some of these rabbis who are very influential in the Israeli government today talk about this process as, quote unquote, the distancing of Ishmael for his correction, right? So the Ishmaelites are fine, the Arabs are fine, so long as they stay in their place, which is not here. And of course, that means the corollary of that is that there's no such thing as a Palestinian Arab. There's no such thing as Palestine. The Jews get Judea and the Arabs get Arabia. And that's it. That's the end of the story. That's always been the position of the right-wing Zionism. And so there's no surprise that they all really love the Abraham Accords and are, very interested in reading it this way.
To use the framework of the episode and of the conversation with Naor, it's like, look, yeah, of course we can be of the same family, but I don't have to live with my cousin.
No, it's actually probably better that if you don't.
Right. And another thing I want to mention that you only touched on briefly in the episode was your work, Matan, which we haven't talked about. Your first book is about research with migrant workers who come to Israel from Thailand to work on farms in the Negev. Maybe you can expand a little bit on that because you only got to touch on it briefly with Naor.
Yeah, we did touch on it briefly. The migrant perspective is really important to me because these are people that I've worked with and sort of started to see the world through their eyes a little bit. As we noted in the last episode, even the most sort of broad Abrahamic framework, the one that includes Christians, is limited to monotheists, right? So it doesn't include Buddhists, for example, which these people happen to be. And so migrants, and as we mentioned, in the UAE, there's a ton of migrant workers as well, and Bahrain. So it's not just an Israeli thing. These people are doubly excluded. They're doubly invisible within this Abrahamic framework, right? They're both not part of the family in the narrow sense, and even not part of the monotheistic family in the broader sense. And so in this framework, the relationship between Jews and Arabs is at least something that's acknowledged as problematic, right? It is this family drama, which everybody wishes at least at some sort of level of principle could be resolved at some point in the future, right? And there's also sorts of even messianic hopes attached to that. But when it comes to migrants, then they're not even on the political radar of this program at all, right? They're not family, which means that, again, in this framework, we can treat them any way we want, completely instrumentally, exploit them, deport them, whatever we feel like. I don't like calling these people slaves because I don't think they see themselves that way. A lot of people talk about modern slavery, human slavery, etc. I don't think migrant workers are slaves. They don't see themselves that way, but this framework certainly does see them as this sort of disposable, kind of barely human material.
Well, because they don't, tell me if I'm wrong, but now the way I understand this is because they're not even part of the picture.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways in which Israel and the UAE and maybe some of these other countries are actually a lot alike, okay? Politically speaking now, I'm not talking about ideology or mythology. I'm talking about actual real-life politics. They're all countries that are heavily dependent on migrant labor to different degrees, right? In the UAE, it's 90%. In Israel, it's more like 12%, but it's pretty heavy. They're all countries in which religious law is the law, especially when it has to do with marriage, family, and women's rights, etc. So we're not just talking about a religious model for politics. We're also talking about religion playing a part in what makes these countries similar. So if you want to use Abraham as a symbol for that, then that's a symbol for something that I at least consider pretty reactionary.
All right. Well, thanks again to you, Matan, and to Naor Ben-Yehoyada for the conversation. And what are we doing in episode 4, the next one?
I'm actually really excited for this one. We have my good friend Yusuf Tayara on, who is an amazing historian of Islam and of the Arab world from Oxford University. And we are going to be talking about the way the story kind of rolls on from the Old Testament into the late antiquity. So when there's all these kind of competing and interacting religious philosophies in the Middle East that only kind of later become what we think of today as the Abrahamic religions. And we talk about Abraham and Ishmael in the Quran and in the Islamic tradition, all the way up to almost, I think, the modern era. We're tracing the myth through all these strange rabbit holes and really unexpected twists and turns that it takes.
Cool. All right. So people know why they should be subscribed to the podcast feed. And, signed up for everything.
Be the first to get it hot off the presses.
Thanks for listening to this episode 3 of Bad Cousins, with me, Ben Stoller, and Matan Kaminer. Guli Dolev Hashaloni is our producer. The music is by Adam Mauer. Thanks also to our media partner, The Diasporist. Check them out. They're at thediasporist.de and also on Instagram. They've also been sharing some cool stuff recently. Check them out. We've also just started a Kolo Media Patreon page, so if you'd like to support us and keep these kinds of shows going, please visit patreon.com/Kolo Media. That's KOLLO Media.